From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on enjoying your spring break day at the beach without having toes removed by an overly aggressive crustacean. And now, the podcast host who steers clear of wild crustaceans because they give him the heebie-jeebies, Pete Dominic!
That is correct, as it always is. The man knows me, or at least I have to pretend that he does. That's Pete Coe, and thank you very much, sir. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I am so sorry that it is late. Got back late Sunday night from Vermont, where I dropped Ava, my 18-year-old, off at UVM with her friend, and they skied in one place. I went to another smaller place a little further south in Middlebury. We all had a great weekend. It was wonderful. I got to meet Mark Lawler, who's been a long-time listener of the show on Friday night. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet others that are up there, but I plan to at some point move there, I think. That's my fantasy after the girls are out of high school. So we'll have plenty of time to spend together, Vermonters. That's why I will build the Shed Village, and you can come stay at one of the sheds on my property. How does that sound? That's something I sometimes think about. I hope you are doing well. I hope that you had a great weekend. I have an excellent guest joining me on today's show. His name is Kevin Richberg, and if you're a longtime listener of the show, if you've been to one of our hangouts, you might be familiar with Kevin because he is a longtime listener, supporter, subscriber, and has become a very good friend to me and my family over the past few years or so that I've gotten to know him, because he lives near my mom and dad, near where I grew up, where he also grew up. But he was a listener for a while and would write to me, and we became pen pals. And then I finally met him and found out he's a genius. He is a brilliant, brilliant guy. And he is my guest today because today we are talking about a lot of the things that he knows a lot about. Things that grow in the ground or even undersea. Kevin Richberg is a graduate of MIT, studied biology, and he is going to hopefully do a series with me here on Stand Up about how to grow things, what to know about climate change, and how to plan for it in terms of planting, in terms of living. Really smart guy, very engaged in politics in the world, and has started his own edible forest, he and his husband, Zach, in upstate New York. We'll talk more about it in a moment with Kevin. Very excited to share this conversation with you. I think you're really going to like it and him, if you don't already. But first, a quick news update. I wasn't sure if I should do this because I know I'm getting the show up a little late on a Monday, but certainly a lot to talk about because it is Monday. So I want to mention, first of all, horrific news out of the South and Mississippi and Alabama, where at least 26 people were killed on Friday night, dozens more injured, more severe storms rolling across the South yesterday. These were devastating tornadoes. The hardest hit places were Rolling Fork and Silver City. They are rural towns, predominantly black areas of Mississippi. And apparently Rolling Fork was essentially flattened. So I think the president's going down there. Certainly FEMA reps have already been down there over the weekend. But in case you missed that, I did want to mention that over the weekend. Also, on Saturday, the first big rally of his 2024 presidential campaign, disgraced former President Donald Trump, who is under investigation about 4,000 different ways, went to Waco, Texas, amid the 30th anniversary of the deadly siege there. Wonder why he picked Waco. And he didn't dwell on the symbolism of speaking in Waco, Charles Blow writes in the New York Times. Waco that still serves as a right-wing cri de coeur against federal authority, Blow says. He didn't have to dwell on it. The speech, like so many of his speeches, was a mix of lies, hyperboles, superlatives, invectives, doomsdaying, puerile humor, and callbacks to old grievances, messaging that operates on multiple levels. Some of his followers hear a call to arms. Some hear their private thoughts given voice. Others hear the lamentations of a valiant victim. Still, others hear a wry jokester poking his finger into the eye of the political establishment. In attacking Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, a likely rival for the Republican nomination for perceived disloyalty, Trump invoked former Tennessee Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, who ran against DeSantis in 2018. A year and a half later, Gillum was found in a Miami Beach hotel room with what reports called a reputed male escort and suspected methamphetamine. But those facts weren't enough for Trump, who turned up the sensationalism, calling Gillum a crackhead and getting a laugh from the crowd. So, yeah. Oh, also, in reaction to this, over on Fox and Friends this morning, the benefit of doing the show early on a Monday morning, Brian Kilmeade got really upset with Donald Trump because he featured, there was a moment where the former president appeared to celebrate the insurrectionists, the rioters, whatever you want to call them, on January 6th at the beginning of the event. Kilmeade really tore into Trump for his celebration on January 6th, rioters calling it absolutely awful and insane that he would do such a thing. How about that? He went on to say, I think for President Trump to spend 80% of his time complaining about court cases instead of just looking at his own record and what he would have done, total waste. All right, well, there you go. That's a reaction from Fox and Friends in the morning. The rest of the time they spent on talking about how violent America is and trans swimmers. And I'm not kidding. There was a lot of that. I fast forwarded through a segment real quick, and it's terrifying what they do each hour over there on Fox News. It's a completely different America that they're focused on. That's a little bit. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. I can't really stomach more. I'm sure you can't either. So let's move on to another quick news story update. Over the weekend, Silicon Valley Bank has a new owner. It was purchased by First Citizens Bank. So there's an update, quick update on that. And here's this from Jonathan Capehart. This is big news over the weekend on MSNBC.
President Vladimir Putin says that Moscow has reached a deal to station nuclear weapons in neighboring Belarus. Putin compared the move to the U.S. stationing weapons in Europe, telling state TV that Russia, quote, agreed with the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, that we would place tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus without violating the non-proliferation regime.
Uh-oh. The stakes are being raised, and we'll see what happens with that. I want to now head over to the Middle East and Israel, where last night, there were major protests because of a move by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who himself is under indictment. Here is NBC News in New York. I guess this is where I got this clip from.
Breaking news overnight in Israel. New video shows the outbreak of mass protests in Israel over a plan to overhaul the country's judiciary.
And take a look at how tens of thousands of people have flooded the streets in the cities across the country overnight. CBS News' Jared Hill joins us live in the newsroom now with an update on the situation there. Hi, Jared.
Hey, Chris and Cindy. We have seen people protesting in Israel for months now, but nothing on the scale of what we are seeing here overnight. The unrest comes after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu abruptly fired his defense minister for challenging his plan to overhaul the judicial system there. Protesters, as you can see, lit bonfires on Tel Aviv's main highway. They closed the thruway and a lot of other streets throughout the country for hours. The overhaul has sparked an intensifying protest movement that spread to nearly every sector of society there. That includes the military, where reservists have increasingly been coming out publicly to voice their opposition.
So that's what's happening in Israel last night. Now let's head to Germany, where they're on strike. Unions launched a 24-hour strike. Airports, buses, train stations across Germany at a standstill on Monday, causing disruption for millions at the start of the working week during one of the largest walkouts in decades as Europe's biggest economy reels from inflation. 24-hour strikes called by the Verdi Trade Union and Railway and Transport Union, EBG, were the latest in months of industrial action, which has hit major European economies as higher food and energy prices dent living standards. I blame Joe Biden for the inflation in Germany. God, that feels a lot better now. Okay. All right. And final thing I want to play for you is Jon Stewart on CNN with Fareed Zakaria. I thought this was really great. I love John's answer. A lot of people have a lot of different answers on whether or not Donald Trump should be prosecuted for this crime or that crime. I think John's one of the smartest commentators and thinkers out there. He always tries to speak truth to power, does it often in an entertaining way, as he does a bit here. And I thought this 3 minutes is worth it. So here you are.
So there are people who say, yes, you have to indict him because he has, in fact, broken the laws. And there are other people who say this is going to turn him into a martyr. This is his path to redemption.
Sure.
How do you think about it?
The law should always take into account someone's popularity. I think that's. I mean, what's happened to our country? It's as though you can't even commit financial fraud anymore. You can't inflate the value of your properties when you need a loan and then deflate it with taxes. I mean, the next thing you know, they're going to send you to jail instead of your lawyer and your accountant and your campaign manager and everyone else around you. The idea that someone may face accountability who's that rich and powerful is outrageous, and this country shouldn't stand for it.
But what if it turns out to be his get out of jail free pass? It's his path to, people will see him as a martyr. Okay. You're okay with that? He could become president again.
He could become president anyway. Fareed, we either have the rule of law or we have no rule of law. The rule of law does not take into account if that might make you a martyr to somebody. I'd much rather have the conversation be, what is the law? What exactly are we saying that he did? His lawyer went to jail for this same situation for a couple of years. So what is the crime? Is it a crime?
There are people who say it's selective prosecution, that this would not...
Everything is selective prosecution. The reason why Donald Trump became popular in the first place, and the reason why these populist movements, is that the citizenry have become fed up with the lack of accountability for those in power. We have no accountability in our financial systems. We have no accountability for the bankers. I mean, our Congress trades stocks with information they get making laws, and they do it to great success. And they won't stop it because they're the ones in charge of making the law about it. And instead of bringing accountability to the rampant corruption that is surrounds our government and our financial systems, the Supreme Court just changed the definition of corruption. Rather than prosecuting it, rather than holding people accountable, they just went, how about this? Okay, why don't we just say this?
All right, I love that. I thought John was dead on, and I fully agree with him. But what do you think? Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, about this or anything else I've covered, or what I should be covering, who I should be having on, what I should be talking about and doing. Let me know, standupwithpete@gmail.com now. All right, and finally, the Final Four for both the men and women in basketball is set. In the men, it's Miami and San Diego State, and Florida Atlantic against Connecticut. Both games are Saturday in Houston. On the women's side, Iowa and LSU advanced, and they are taking on South Carolina meets Maryland, and Virginia Tech plays Ohio State. So I guess they're not fully set on the women's side, but there's that update on that. Did you watch any? Are you watching basketballs? Anybody? Well, I'm not watching basketball. I'm not even sure I'm watching why I mentioned that news story. I do kind of care who plays in the Final Four. I am interested in that and sometimes watch it. ChatGPT is getting better and smarter. I'm paying close attention to that, and soon we'll have somebody on the show about it. And the weekend box office was led by John Wick 4, and I can't believe it. I'm not a fan of those movies. I find them too violent. A lot of you I know like them, but I've watched, I think, one or two of them, and I'm not a big fan. It's too much for me, personally. But all right, there you go. That's it. That's the news. Now it's time to get to my guest. He is, like I said, a very good friend of mine. He's become a very good friend of mine over the past few years. And, well, here's his official bio. He's the co-owner now of Slate Hill Edible Forest in central New York. It's a 27-acre fruit orchard, biodiversity collection, and experimental farm focused on adaptation to changing climate. Kevin Richberg has advanced degrees in chemistry, molecular biology from Caltech and MIT. Before going into farming full-time, he spent 10 years of his life on a massive worldwide exploration of 122 countries, which we touch on just a little bit here in our conversation. His current projects at Slate Hill Edible Forest include an apricot breeding program, restoring old-school hard cider cultivars, and a 300-fruit variety living maze. I've seen it in its infancy. I hope all of you will go visit Kevin and Zach on the farm in central New York if you're ever up there. And I think this is a great conversation with a really smart guy who I'm so happy to have as part of our community. And we're experimenting with ways to feature more segments where he can answer your questions on different platforms, including the podcast and other social media platforms. So I'm very excited to welcome Kevin to the show right now. You can find out more about him and how to contact him in the show notes. But this has been a long time coming, this conversation, and I'm very happy to finally present it, to share it with you. I hope you like it. Ladies and gentlemen, listener profile, very special, very smart guy, Kevin Richberg.
Boom. We've got Kevin Richberg now, and this is going to be really fun because we've really gotten to know each other over the past couple of years, and in fact, broke bread. Our families broke bread. I was thinking about that, and I was kind of like thinking about how it would be funny to talk about our friendship and the uniqueness of it, but more importantly, I was like, yeah, that's a pretty big deal because you just lost your dad, but I got to meet your parents and Zach at the time at your parents' house. My parents were there and my daughters were there. Val wasn't there, but we broke bread together. That was a wonderful night, that first night.
Yeah, they still, my parents, my mom, and Zach, we all still speak of that fondly. Mom asks about you from time to time. She goes, "How's that Pete doing?"
I like that I get that, Pete. I think that's complimentary. And of course, my mom doesn't need to ask about you because you have your own friendship with my mom. You have been very kind and generous. And of course, my mom loves you and Zach, and that's wonderful for me.
She is great to us. She comes over and drops off baked goods and chats and gives us all the gossip and then goes home.
Well, I'm very happy to be taping a conversation. This has been in the works for a long time. I've always kind of had this be an open invitation. And now that you are launching your website and your business, your dream is starting to unfold, it's time to really start talking about what you are doing here in its infancy. But also, we're going to try to maybe do a series of conversations that answer listeners' questions about how to grow things, how to adapt to climate and anything they want for you. Ask Kevin. But first, let's get to know Kevin, shall we?
We shall do that.
Okay. You have had a really fascinating life. You've traveled the world. You've seen the world. And in 2010, you actually began your travel and writing career with something called 30 dates, 30 blind dates, 30 cities in 30 consecutive days. Is that right? Do I have it right?
You have that correct. I was transitioning out of my graduate work at MIT, and I wasn't going to stay in the sciences. I knew I was going to transition into travel writing and photography, two things I had been passionate about, but never thought I was going to make a living off of or could make a living off of. And I just went for it. And I came up with this crazy idea that to get attention, essentially. This was back, you said 2010. This was back when getting attention, was more about creative ideas online and less about taking all your clothes off on TikTok. And so I came up with this incredibly complex concept that I knew I could pull off, and I did. Essentially, at its base level, I went on 30 blind dates solicited over the internet in 30 different cities across the United States, one after another, for 30 days in October of 2010.
And you documented all of it.
Yeah.
How did you document it? Where did you share it?
There was and I say was, it's all past tense. There was a website that I would log on to every night after each date and upload content to. Nowadays it would just all have been done on Instagram and TikTok, and those things weren't there back then. So it was an old-fashioned website, and I had followers and people who would every day follow this incredible journey I was on, trying to relate to it, try to see how they would feel if they were in my shoes, and just see if I could pull it off. Because it was, I needed to see if I could pull it off. And when I say 30 different cities, I don't mean like I went to, I live in Marcellus, New York. I don't mean I went down to Ithaca and to Rochester. I went all the way out to Spokane, Washington was the farthest west. and Billings, Montana. I had a date in Denver, one in Wichita, one in Houston, one in Pensacola, Birmingham. It was a massive undertaking. I would drive in the morning. So I planned it out so that I would have about six hours on average of driving. So I'd get up early in the morning, drive, and then each person who was taking me out, and they weren't taking me out in a sense of that I was just going on a bunch of free dates. It was, we split everything. But they planned it. So that was one thing I didn't have to do. So when I showed up, the dates came up with sometimes some of the just most incredible stuff. Really, really great stuff. One gentleman had a hot air balloon ride that we went up on.
I'm scared.
One did horseback riding. One went to an art show. It was October, so one went in Birmingham. We went to a haunted warehouse, and that was one of the scariest, most horrible things I've ever done in my life. Adrenaline pumping. I'm not a scares type of person, but it was an incredible idea. It was great.
Why did you do that? Besides wanting to get attention, I mean, that's a pretty specific thing to do. Were you trying to? Was it no bigger than that? Were you trying to have?
No, I actually really, naively believed that I was making a big transition in my life. I was going to become, I was going to go into a professional state where I could live anywhere and do anything. I was going to free myself from, I lived in Boston at the time, from being in one place with a house and rent. I honestly thought if I found love, I could just go, and I could have. Spoiler alert, it did not work out, and it would be another 9 years until I met my partner, who we own the farm and work the farm today.
So when you finished your graduate work, you're at MIT, and you were studying microbial life at hydrothermal vents flowing out of the East Pacific rise, which is what I did my undergraduate work in.
Yeah, there's a lot of people working on that.
Yeah.
A lot of people. No.
And this work took you to the bottom of the ocean, specifically the Pacific Ocean. And it sounds fascinating. It's one of the greatest university programs in the world. Why did you go there? What were you thinking you would do? And then you talk about the transition and to where you're at now. You've used all those skills in that education clearly, but why did you go to MIT? For what?
I was trying to find myself for decades, and I know people use that term. I think maybe it's a little older now than. People don't use it so much anymore, going out in the world trying to find yourself. I graduated from Caltech with an undergrad in 2000, and I had a degree in chemistry and biology and astronomy. And I worked for a biotech for a short period of time. Then I worked as an educator. Then I just traveled the world, just, farting around. And I needed to get myself back on track. At least I thought so. So going to graduate school and getting into a PhD program just seemed like what I had to do in order to find a permanent career. So I applied, MIT accepted me, and I was actually going to go study seaweed. And I agreed to do it without really putting too much thought into thinking that wouldn't bring me joy. And so while I was at MIT, I actually stumbled on an advisor who needed someone to come work on a much more exciting project. And so I jumped over to that, and that's how I got into studying microbial life at hydrothermal vents, which, is absolutely an incredible once-in-a-lifetime project to be doing, because you take your samples at the bottom of the ocean. And we're not talking, going down scuba diving, or the other extreme, going down in the James Cameron submersible, but the science vessel, the Alvin, that goes down is one hell of a trip. It's 2.5 kilometers down to my study site. It takes 1.5 hours to get down there and about 2 hours to get back. You're going down to look and gaze at something that very, very few people have ever laid eyes on, which is gases, hydrothermal gases emitting from inside the crust at the bottom of the ocean, and all the life that comes not from the sun, but from the chemistry of the energy inside the earth. And it is a really remarkable thing to see. It's a remarkable thing to study. I was very, very lucky.
I'm looking at this vessel, the Alvin, that at Woods Hole.
It is. Yeah. Woods Hole was my program was a joint program. MIT Woods Hole. I actually did most of my research at Woods Hole.
Oceanographic. What is it?
Yeah, Oceanographic Institute. We call it HUI.
It's a really, really prestigious place. Everybody in the Northeast kind of knows of it to some extent. So that is a crazy thing that you did. It's a very unique thing that you did. Was it spiritual?
I am not in any way a religious person, but as far as spiritual goes, it was goosebumps all the way down. You have seen pictures of what you're going to see. The window you look out, you're in a titanium sphere. The titanium sphere is about 8 inches thick. It's the only way that the pressure won't crush the entire sphere, killing everyone. You're in this massive, it's pressurized to an atmosphere. So you're not going through any of the things that you would go through with diving or anything like that. You're taking down a small bit of air in order for you to breathe, but with an enormous amount of protection. And the window that you look through is a plexiglass style 8-inch thick circular small window that you put your face up against to see a whole other world. And when you're looking through that window and you're seeing the life, that crazy eels and octopi and crabs that don't look anything like stuff you can see when you're diving or on land. No, it's all otherworldly. Spiritual, yeah, it does look like you're looking at a completely different world.
I was just thinking, it must be something special, unique to the feeling of being down there. It's like thinking about astronauts looking back at the planet to some extent.
Yeah, it's been the process of going down into the abyss has been compared to going into space. One, because so few people have done it. The same scientists tend to go back over and over again because they spent their life studying down there. There's only one of these that at least is controlled by institutions in the United States. There's one in Europe. They have a submersible they use. And so it can be, amazing and life-changing for the people. And that's, I think, why a lot of the individuals stay with it. I didn't. So I guess it couldn't have been that spiritual because I decided to move on to something else. But I think what I thought about more than anything was not how special it was for me. It was how it connected to life. And like I said, the most important thing I kept thinking of, and I kept thinking of it after I'd been back for weeks and months, is how much physical life there was that had no connection to the sun and everything that we experience up here. Right. And a different way of looking at it would be, if the sun were to disappear tomorrow and the earth were to completely freeze over and just be going through space alone, everything up here would die. Everything. But not down there. The water would remain liquid. The hydrothermal vents from the energy inside the planet itself would continue to put out the chemical mix, and all of those creatures would go about their days as if nothing had happened.
That's pretty fascinating and dark sounding, literally. So
yeah, it is very dark. There's no light down there. You have to bring a flashlight.
You traveled around the world, and I think that I feel like the theme of your life in many ways has been searching, because you did so many different things and you went to so many different places. Is there anything to say what you were looking for, or were there many things that you were looking for? What did you find in your travels? You sent me this amazing list of experiences you had, from a near-death experience to driving a rental car from Santiago, Chile, down to Conquilo National Park. You willfully stole an entire tank of gas in Tunisia and tried to escape with it, but you got caught by the police. I mean, you have done all kinds of things except for smoke a cigarette, cigar, or marijuana, which is crazy. You've lived and worked for periods of time in Germany, Finland, Scotland, Australia, Argentina, South Africa, and the Czech Republic. Who are the happiest people in the world?
The Finns.
That's what they say.
Gosh, that's what they say, and it's true.
There was just an article that every year they do some stupid index. I mean, I say stupid because happy is so subjective, I guess. Maybe you think it's a fair analysis, but Finland just got it like for the 6th year in a row. So go ahead. You lived there.
If you were to go out in society and interact with people, from individuals at gyms to supermarkets, at movie theaters, the bus driver, every day, and always see individuals who smile, have something nice to say, you don't witness any conflict or people being out of sorts. Little things to, you don't see any litter anywhere. Everybody's obeying traffic rules, possibly because there are cameras everywhere and you will get a ticket, which I got several of those. That could have something to do with it. But you just get the sense that it's the best of us. And I think for me, it's comparative. So a lot of my travels around, no matter where I would be, I would always be comparing it back to the States, because I've done a significant amount of travel in the States. I've been to every state multiple times. And so it's not just talking about New York or living in the cities I've lived in, Boston, San Francisco, or Los Angeles. It just, all of America is so much different from the societies you can experience when you travel around. And the more that I would do it, the more that became an obsession. Like, why was I writing? I'm going to ask and answer my own question. Why was I doing the travel writing, the photography? I became obsessed, not just with having the experiences myself, but to selling them to Americans, to trying to, I would say this to people constantly. My entire ethos was trying to get Americans to leave America as sort of a way to save it. Like, if I could get more people to have passports, get more people to be interested in doing something that would just get them on a plane, get them in another country, the experience wouldn't do it, but all the ancillary things. For example, if you flew out of LaGuardia, old LaGuardia, and you landed at the airport, your destination was Johannesburg, South Africa, and you landed in Johannesburg airport, you'd think you'd gone into some futuristic sci-fi novel where everything worked and everything was shiny and clean and beautiful. And then you'd have to realize my preconceived notions of what it would be like to land in South Africa are bunk. And also, I just left LaGuardia, where I could have been eaten by rats trying to get to the plane.
I love that. I love what you said, that you were trying to get Americans to leave America to save it, meaning go have experiences and come back home and share those experiences or be colored by those experiences. That's pretty cool. How did you feel? Did you succeed at that? You were mostly dispatching articles, photography?
Yep. I made the deal with the devil with the Huffington Post. Mm-hmm. So I got signed up in order to be able to post anything I wanted, talk about anything I wanted. They put down, for example, this is before the war, but I did a fantastic piece. It might still be up there in the archives of the Huffington Post about how everyone should go to Syria. That's something I did for my 30th birthday. I went to Syria, took a ton of pictures, had a fantastic time in Damascus, and then tried to convince everyone else to go there.
The Syria I Remember by Kevin Richberg. Wow, yep. It's here. I'll share it in the show notes, everybody. And I wish I had known I would have read it before, but there's so much to learn. Continue.
And when I say obsession, I really mean I got obsessed with it. And probably to an unhealthy degree, because it led to me doing some other projects that I may or may not have talked to you about before, where I tried to fight the man that was making it more difficult for people to make trips overseas. one of the things that you'd always hear, and I'm sure it's still true now, people will say, I can't go to fill in the blank. I can't go to Spain. I can't go to Italy. I can't go to Argentina because it will cost all the money I have. Then I will be poor, won't be able to pay my mortgage. Then I'll be homeless. Like that direct line of thinking will occur.
Yeah.
And all because I wanted to go see Spain because you told me it would change my life. It will change my life. I'll be homeless. And the cost aspect of it really started to grate on me because I knew how to get to all these places on, poverty wages and still have all these experiences. And it was hard to teach that, but I sort of became obsessed with the companies that were making this more expensive. I got really interested in trying to get rid of fees. Like, how Joe Biden's all big on fees now? Go back in time and look up me and fees. I was on fees ages ago. The magical resort fees, I was railing about those things. My old book agent wrote me a text the other day, and he said, "Oh, Joe Biden must have finally watched your video."
Because for 2 years, you did mathematical research to expose the percentage of hospitality expenses, quote, being siphoned out of online hotel bookings and into the pockets of Expedia and Priceline. In essence, you say, extracting value from hotels and lodging over the decade, it took Expedia and Priceline to develop the entire lodging space in a world before Airbnb. I'm not reading this right, but what did you do? What did you learn?
Well, there's a couple things that might come as a surprise to people. And this is one thing that I was trying to let people know was that there may be 100 different booking sites, but they're almost all owned by two companies, the two that you just read. If people knew that 25% of the amount of money that they're paying to go stay in a hotel someplace is going to the engine that takes their money and then has no accountability for the service or the hospitality itself after that, they may find that the value, like just give you an example, you go to Italy, you're going to go to Sicily, you spend $1,000 on hotel rooms for your family, and then I tell you, well, actually, you only spent $750. There's $250 of that dollars went to the company you booked with, and they pocketed it right away before you even left on the trip. And you'll never get, if you thought that clicking on that website brought you $250 worth of value, then that's a perfectly fine choice to make. But if that number upsets you in any way, the system isn't working for the people that are using it. That was my opinion. And so I went around purposely I stayed in a Motel 6 in New York that marketed itself as a 3-star Motel 6. I'll send you the picture, Pete. There was a outline of a corpse body on the chair in my room. And I don't think it was a 3-star corpse outline. It was frightening. And actually, I mean, if they wanted to market themselves as a haunted house,
maybe it was being used for this on the set of Law and Order or something. They couldn't have just left the outline of a dead person in your hotel room.
Right. Well, I mean, hey, you want to market it like that and say, hey, this is 3 stars, you could have this amazing experience, go for it. But it's all part of the system that, the Motel 6 was not trying to deceive people so much as it's trying to claw back.
Trying to fill rooms.
Yeah, it's trying to fill rooms, but hotels have always been trying to fill rooms. They're trying to claw back the money that's being sucked from them like a vampire from online engines, because they have to run a business. They have to provide the hospitality. So despite the fact that someone clearly died in that room, I felt sad for, someone died in the room. I feel sad for them for that reason, but I felt sad for them because that they felt like they had to do this in order to be able to stay afloat.
Did you ever get in all your years of travel or living, did you ever get comfortable or become interested in kind of the finer things, the higher end hotels, restaurants? How much did that kind of quality of those experiences matter to you? Because you went to a lot of countries that have all different kinds of places to stay.
Yeah. The country that would have broke me was absolutely the Maldives. You can fly into Mali Airport in the Maldives and just go to the capital, Mali. And go now, because literally it's going to be underwater within the next decade and there won't be the Maldives anymore. Side note. But you will just see the society of the Maldivian people doing their thing. But if you leave that island and go anywhere else, you will instantaneously enter a 5-star resort. That's all there are. The rest of the archipelago has been transformed into a paradise unlike anything I've ever seen. I went as a business cooperation in order to be able to sell the Maldives to Americans. So it wasn't on my dime. It wouldn't have been able to be on my dime. There's no way I could have afforded to go there. I would have been homeless. And I got to have absolutely incredible experiences, the kind where you walk, the ones you see sometimes on Instagram, where people are walking out the back of their cabana and they look down and there's a glass bottom hot tub so that they can sit in the hot tub and watch the sharks underneath them in the ocean, that sort of experience. And it didn't tempt me. And I'm really glad it didn't. It was great. It was wonderful. And when I was done, I came back and I thought, wow, that was awesome. And if you ask me what was the best thing that I did while I was there, I wouldn't have said any of the luxury stuff, not the spas, none of that, none of the food, although it was incredible. And I did enjoy all that. It was going out with the manta rays and filming them because they were interested in coming to me. I've dove with whale sharks. I've been out with dolphins, and I would not have guessed, but it is true. If you go out with manta rays and they want to see you, they're curious animals. If they want to come play with you, they will turn around and they will head towards you and they will do a couple passes to see what you're all about. And that was the best experience I had. I was there. And that you didn't have to be homeless for. You could have just booked one day at a 5-star, got in, gone and seen them, and then left.
Now, can they swallow you whole? No.
They could accidentally probably put your head in their mouth and then, have a horrible time and try to spit you out. But
they would choke on the likes of you. Do you have other experiences, whether it be under the seas, scuba diving, or anywhere else with nature, with an animal during those travels that you would share before I transition into the more recent times in your life?
This is something most people don't realize you can do. Doing your own safari in Africa leads you to have animal experiences that are pretty epic. And DIY safari, you won't see those advertised because nobody makes money off of them. But if you go to South Africa and go to Johannesburg Airport, rent a car and drive to Kruger National Park, pay your entrance fee, they will let you in. Just like any national park in the United States. Most people don't realize that. Most Americans would never do that because
they don't want to be eaten by a lion.
Right, exactly. The fear aspect of it. You get a pamphlet. There's a pamphlet that says do this.
Oh, you get a pamphlet. Then what's the issue?
There's no issue. That's what I'm saying. It's almost all the parks in South Africa are private car entrance because South Africans want to go. They don't want to pay the safari company to take them in a safari in their own backyard. They just
so you did that. You went on your own safari, which is you had a vehicle of some sort and you drove around and saw animals on your own in the park.
Yeah. And not just, I did it in South Africa, Namibia. We went up to Zambia and Zimbabwe, through Botswana. Driving through the desert parks in Botswana and the desolation and the giant animals and, the elephants in literally the middle of nowhere, just asking yourself, how could these animals possibly survive? And it's just you and whoever you're traveling with and your beat up rental car and elephants. And yeah, that was amazing. If I could get the word out that is something that people could do and convince Like, Pete, I'll spend the next 10 years trying to convince you that you need to take your family on a DIY safari, and that it will change your life.
Yeah, I mean, I would do it in a heartbeat. You have to convince the rest of my family, and good luck. I'll do that.
Read the pamphlet. Tell them there's a pamphlet.
It's a website. We'll watch one video. All right, so I could talk with you about all of these experiences, and I have in the past, and I will in the future, and hopefully on tape again. And people can go look up your name, and a lot of your stuff is still up there at the Huffington Post. So that's pretty cool. But I want to talk about kind of what you're doing now and how you can serve as a utility and potentially, work with more folks here in our community based on your expertise. You are now the co-owner of Slate Hill Edible Forest in central New York, in the town that I grew up in. You grew up in a town nearby, but now you live in the town I grew up in where you bought this property. A 27-acre fruit orchard, biodiversity collection, an experimental farm focused on adaptation to a changing climate. So how long have you had this idea that now I've literally seen with my own eyes several times, and you're working on this? It's in its infancy, and so it's so exciting to bring listeners inside your world, and hopefully all of the people who are listening will at some point visit Marcellus in central New York, Slate Hill Edible Forest, and have an amazing experience there, because you have some pretty cool dreams that you guys are building. But tell me where this dream incubated. Where did it begin? On one of those trips?
It's definitely informed by all the travel I've done and all the experiences I've had, but it's probably been incubating as the smallest of seeds inside my mind since I was little, because on both sides of my family, I came from farmers. My grandparents, my mom's mother and father, owned a dairy farm in Baldensville, which is, about 30 minutes away from where we are now and close to where I grew up. And I was over at that dairy farm once a month, every month growing up. And I had no interest in farming, but I was around it all the time. And then I went off and lived in California, went to the bottom of the ocean, traveled the world. And if you had told me, especially back in my living in California days, if you'd said, was I ever going to leave California and ever come back to New York State, I would have said, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. I hope that place burns.
Ironically, California has.
Exactly. No, it's prescient, but in the wrong way. And I think a lot of people who return home, then they say to themselves, this was always going to happen.
Yeah.
I was always going to find happiness where I started, doing something that I saw all around me. It's like we covet all these things, then we get what we want, then we go back home. And so farming has been inside me this whole time. And the scientist is what this kind of farm is. So I've always been a scientist. I was a traveler. Farming's always been inside me. And I've always wanted to have a family and start a family. So that last part was incompatible with living everywhere across the planet. And I knew that. I knew that at one point I was going to have to make a final decision about what I wanted to do. Like you alluded to it earlier, searching for yourself. Well, I met a man, fell in love, and we had the same dream of he loves growing things. He loves watching life. And from the earliest first dates we had, we would talk about what it would be like to have a farm. And as we got closer and closer and got engaged, the pandemic happened, and I went to him. This is me sort of like drawing on all of the experiences I've had around the world, spending time in China, spending time in India, when the pandemic was just things that were happening in another part of the world. I actually went to him in January of 2020 and said, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right now. Because if we wait and this really does sweep over the world like I think it's going to, we may miss our opportunity. We may get stuck in the unintended consequences of the world's stupidity. And so I pushed him. I really pushed him to buy this property quickly after that. And I'm really glad I did, because during the pandemic, we were here. We were starting our dream. We were saying we bought our forever home on a 27-acre piece of land that was like a blank slate. I call it a canvas. It's the canvas where we're going to paint the work I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
It's so cool to hear you talk about it, but it's so much cooler to actually see it coming to life. All these little baby saplings all across, and at least twice, if not 3 times, maybe more. I've been there with you and our dogs, and we've walked around that property, and I visualize you just pointing and talking and explaining things. And that alone is worth a visit, and seeing it in its infancy and hearing the excitement in your voice, talking about what it could be, what you hope it will be, what could stand in the way of it being that. Talk to me about the experimental part of it. Talk to me about, as you did the first time I ever went there, you talked about how you're planting things that, if you time it right, will adapt to temperature change in that part of New York. So climate change seems very, very subtle, but to the biology, to the microbiology living in the ground, it's noticing when seasons start earlier, temperatures change and are consistent, and so on. I'll shut up. Explain to me the experimental part of it, and how you're trying to adapt to climate, and how I would imagine most farmers are thinking about that.
The climate is definitely changing. I think everyone doesn't have to have a pundit or scientist or individual on a podcast tell them that. They can simply experience a year. People with farms around here, if you're, I'm 44 years old. When I was a child, the winter was different. Everything was different. The seasons were different. And it's now so real that we're all there's no more pretending anymore. And what we're doing here is looking into the future as the trends of it being wetter and warmer for our region. It won't be the same everywhere. Global warming was a bad term because it made everyone think that everything was going to get warmer everywhere and that was going to be the end of it. And that's not how it's going to happen. The word change is a better word, because the averages in temperature and precipitation that our entire societies, that all of our societies around the world are built upon, are going to change. So everything that has been constructed with the idea that the past will be an indicator of what will happen in the future won't be reliable anymore. And so things that used to be true, you used to be able to grow peaches in Georgia and make a fantastic living off of these amazing peaches. You may not be able to do that anymore for reasons that are utterly outside your control. Here at the farm, we're trying to put in trees. A lot of it is fruit trees and other fruit bushes and berry bushes and other things that wouldn't have been possible in the average temperature and precipitation from 20 years ago, where we are now, and that may have trouble in the next 5 years. But in 20 years, given what scientists believe is going to happen here and what we can sort of see from the trends, they'll be golden. So it's a different kind of farming in a sense that almost every farm in the United States started by looking into the past to find out what had worked and copying that. And you can't do that anymore.
What is climate change doing to farming in general, and what is it that you on your farm are not going to be doing?
Climate change is altering a lot of the things, well, it's putting in the grave aspects of farming that were already sickly. And most people know what tilling is. Tilling is something that almost every farm that does annual crops has been doing for ages. Thomas Jefferson, founding father, who we all love, invented a type of plow that...
Do we all love him?
Well, you know, he did some fun things.
I mean, he was a sexually assaulting rapist. Apparently,
Yes.
Listen,
and he ushered in. He gave his stamp of approval to tillage.
He was
farming.
An enlightened gentleman who
would go on to destroy agriculture as we know it. So I mean,
what's wrong with tilling?
Tilling, the science is catching up to the reality that tilling has been the worst way you could do farming if your goal was to have a sustainable practice. And even farmers who say, well, I don't care about sustainability. Sustainability cares about you. If you till your field every year for 20 years and replant a monoculture is the same crop or the same two crops in rotation every year for 20 years, you will end up, and farmers know this. This is despite, old crotchety Iowa farmers who want to plant corn until they're in the grave. They know from their own yields and their own observations that it doesn't work. Their soil will become dead. The inputs, the fossil fuel fertilizer inputs they'll have to use in order to get the same result, keep increasing, the costs keep increasing. And it's because tilling murders the ecosystem in the soil necessary. It's not necessary. I'm going to back up. I'm going to take that word back. It murders the ecosystem that has evolved to make life flourish anywhere. So instead of working with Mother Nature and with the gifts of how plants that we are ultimately trying to get things from have evolved to succeed themselves, it would be like if someone came to you, punched you in the face, kicked you in the gut, beat you with a baseball bat, put you back into your podcasting chair and said, okay, now do a podcast.
I would nail it.
Right. Okay. Well, you would nail it the first time, but they would come back the next day and do it again.
And I would be like Captain America. I would say I could do this all day long.
Right.
Meaning at some point you would not be able to do it. This horribly violent and specifically tailored to me violent metaphor is meant to say after a certain amount of time you won't be able to do what you know how to do, what you're good at doing in this case.
The soil and the plant won't be able to do it anymore.
So that's just tilling. That's just one practice. Are there other practices that are going out?
Chemical fertilizers have the same pesticides and herbicides, especially the synthetic ones, have the same. It's like double whammy. So everyone has heard of Monsanto as a boogeyman, and one of the darknesses that they visited on farming is this idea that we will solve a weed problem. Nobody wants weeds. Farmers don't want weeds. We'll solve a weed problem by genetically engineering the crop to resist a chemical that we can then dump on the crop. The crop's fine. And the weeds will die and everyone will be happy.
Brilliant.
Oh, fantastic. All of that life in the soil that I was speaking about earlier that is murdered by tillage has to experience that chemical as well. And they are screaming and crying out and, well, most of the time just dying. And so it's like a gut punch two ways. So you've tilled, you've dumped a bunch of chemicals, and then you really have dead soil. And plants, as amazing as they are, the ability of plants to take the energy from the sun, which, by the way, is all the energy from the sun is powered everything since forever. And the sun doesn't get enough credit. This is a live read for the sun.
Yeah.
The sun responsible for 99.999% of everything on the planet, period. So the sun, these plants can capture the energy from the sun and turn it into food, but they can't do any of that without all of their friends, all their partners in the soil, in the rhizosphere, that partner with them in a grand symbiosis where the fungi and the bacteria, they come to the plant and they say, plant, we will help you. We will give you all the little things you need to make your structures and your fruits and your flowers grand and wonderful. You need things, you need manganese. We've got manganese. You, plant, can harvest the energy of the sun and make food. Well, give us a little bit of food. We'll give you manganese. And that relationship is growing things. And farming, the way we've been doing farming has been spitting in the face of all that for hundreds of years.
I like when you say manganese.
There's molybdenum as well. Molybdenum.
Oh, you really nailed them. We are going to do, I have so many more questions for you. This is just part one. And we're going to do, this is also getting to know Kevin. And I'm learning a lot about you as well that I didn't know. It's really cool. But I also think that we've established your credibility in our 47th minute here, and your knowledge and your experience and your passions, and to some extent, your sense of morality. I think that's clear. Anybody who knows you even a little bit. But let's hear at the end answer just a couple of questions for people that people have as a way to kind of preview what we'll hopefully do more of. And let's be sure to plug the farm. If anybody is in any way in Central New York or wants to sojourn up that way, at some point we'll all have a big party there. Go to Slate Hill Edible Forest, where soon you've already sold some things. You sold some special types of trees, right? Scion wood.
Yeah, we have a collection of all the varieties we've already put in the last 3 years. And so we provide copies of the wood in that collection for sale. It's mostly fruit trees, but in the future it'll be landscape trees, other kinds of food.
In
berries.
August, you will hopefully have honey. Last year, you took me through the beekeeping, which is hilarious and entertaining and interesting. Shout out to a listener named Danny Mock, who's doing some beekeeping of his own down there in Texas. But you're going to have honey. You'll have hopefully your first bushel of plums in the fall. And of course, I can't wait to see you. And I love to think the idea that folks listening in this community will want to hire you for your personal consultation services over Zoom or any other way, or who want to do what some part of what you're doing at our homes and property. You've been so generous to me with advice over the years. Super helpful. So let's get into it with just a couple of questions here about advice. Because I've been growing seedlings for my garden, and I need to put them in bigger pots. So I texted you and I said, "What? Can I get soil from outside?" You said, "No, don't do that. The pathogens, something about pathogens." I think you used. You said, "No, get planting soil." Everybody knows that. So I go to the nursery and I said, I would like a bag of planting soil. And why is it, first of all, that people who work at nurseries are ironically mean? Is that a thing?
That is definitely a thing.
Why are they? You would think these would be the kindest people and they would want to encourage you. This gentleman was not gentle at all. And he said, there's this kind and there's this kind. This is organic. And I go, well, what's wrong with the non-organic? He goes, I wouldn't eat anything grown in that soil. Get this one. And I felt scolded, and he was just not nice.
Okay, well, that was a marketing ploy. I'm not even sure what organic soil is.
Organic potting soil versus like the Miracle-Gro potting soil.
The word organic. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, but the word organic is so bastardized and abused. You asked me one of the things
I got the organic soil. It was filled with nuts and a bottle. It had iron shards in it.
A mouse body.
A body of
that's organic. That's one thing we're not doing at the farm is we're not going to certify anything organic. We can talk about that in a future episode. The bastardization of that word and the how you're organic, I'm organic, the soils are organic. The New York State definition of organic is not organic.
Interesting.
But I want to answer your question because it's a really good question. The way that we do gardening, and you should follow this rule because it produces the results that we need, is if you want to grow something like, I'm going to use tomatoes and peppers as an example because of where we live. I know you grow them. You would not be able to meet the window of going out in the springtime when the soil was warm enough, putting in a tomato seed and getting a tomato plant at the end. There's not enough time there might be in the future for climate change. So stay tuned. But for now, we start our seedlings inside because we want to get them to a place to transition into the temperate window that we live in, the amount of time, the amount of growing days we have. And so you could put that tomato seed out in June into the ground. It will grow. The roots will be fine. They will interact with the natural soil environment and nothing will go wrong. But the fact that we do them inside in order to sort of cheat and skip, that seed will not be exposed to the enemies of the seed. It will not be tested. It will not be able to fight off root rots and crown rots and rots of various kinds. So that's why I cautioned you not to go out and dig up potting soil and bring it outside because what you'd essentially be doing is bringing in all the baddies, those rots to a plant that had no power to defend itself because it wasn't tested in the right environment. And so you have to grow that plant to a size large enough that it can overcome those stresses once it does go out into the world. And that's why people should not be potting things indoors in outdoor soil.
The same is true for the sun, right? The artificial light is exposed to your little seedling there, all these lights. And then when I bring it outside, the sun can burn it. You're supposed to harden off, which is annoying because it means you're supposed to bring your plants out and give them a little, sun for an hour or a little while each day. And that's too much. That's a lot. I have a hard time with that.
Well, do an experiment. One day on the sunniest day, take one of your seedlings and put it in 8 to 10 hours of direct sunlight for the very first time after being in a light. And you will come back, give it plenty of water. Excuse me, you will still come back to a organism burnt to a crisp.
Yeah.
And that's because the sun, we already did live read for the sun. Sun, thank it every day because it's the only reason you're here. Has a lot more in it than just the light that comes out of LED or fluorescent bulbs that you're using. It has the infrared light, but the ultraviolet also. Why we get skin cancer and tans is the same thing that the plants have to adapt to, and they have all the mechanisms. But like any lazy entity or an entity trying to preserve its resources, they don't turn on those abilities unless they have to, because it costs energy. So why grow a thicker cuticle or a thicker leaf or all of the natural sunscreens that the plant can produce if there's no sun?
Right.
So that hardening off that you're talking about is essentially introducing them to the idea that they need to get their act together and turn on those mechanisms. And it's in the world without humans, no plant would be in that position. So it's ultimately our responsibility to care for them in the appropriate way. So to only do that test, I said, with one plant. Don't put all your plants out. You lose all your plants.
I have a million more questions, but I want to wrap with something I just want you to share with us, and we'll come back to this, and I wanted to plug the website, and we'll come back to this over and over, and maybe we'll host some live Facebook Lives on the Stand Up Garden page. We'll obviously make you available at our Hangouts whenever you're there, and if anybody wants to hire Kevin, reach out to him right now, and you can tell how brilliant he is, and he'd be more than happy to help you, I'm sure, as he has been to me and so many others. But what is your vision? What is your and Zach's vision in 5 years or 10 years for Slate Hill Edible Forest? Whenever you talk about it, it's kind of thrilling to hear you light up, and it's really exciting to imagine what could be. Tell us your dreams so that when in a few years we can all experience it with you.
The dream, both of us are pitch perfect on exactly what we want to be doing in 10 years, 20 years. We want to have a property that is a collection of an actual edible forest that is the best of all possible practices for not just farming, but for coexisting with the land and enjoying food and produce in the way that it should be, it used to be. One thing we didn't talk about is I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future, is people get their food from the grocery store and they think that's what food is supposed to taste like. And that's sad, because if you've ever grown your own peach, you know that there is absolutely no comparison, in that thing, that whatever that is in the grocery store that's not a peach. But I digress. And a big part of it is we want to not just collect these things and have these things like hoarders who go out and revel in their own creation. We want to teach people. We want to educate. I see the farm as being an attractant, not just for people to come and buy food, but to witness how amazing the living space can be, even though the world is going to change and it is going to be complex and difficult, and how to get through that and work with Mother Nature. We're going to continue to be advocates for somehow trying to reverse the damage that we've all done to the planet. But 2 people can't do that themselves. But what we can do is our part with our land to transform it back in harmony with Mother Nature, and then show other people what that's all about.
And I've seen you do it, and you showed me already. And folks should invest now in becoming friends with you and friendly with you, so they can learn and do something similar. And I bet you there's a lot of listeners out there with some variation of your dream, like me. So let's put a pin in this. I'm so happy to have gotten it started. I look forward to having these conversations with you, however regularly we want, answering listeners' questions. Maybe people have disagreements. Maybe there's some people that are educated like you and have different views. We could bring them on and you can talk about things, and it would be great. I know there's a lot of fascinating people out there that are hobbyists like me, or more serious like you guys. And there's a lot to learn, and it's very satisfying and rewarding to do as you get older, I will say, from my own opinion. So thank you very much, Kevin. This was awesome.
You're very welcome. It's great being here.
We will talk again very soon. And what do we, I'll put it in the show notes, but do we have SlateHillEdibleForest.com. SlateHillEdibleForest.com. And all that information and how to get in touch with Kevin is in there. Thank you, my friend. Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, there he goes, Kevin Richberg, SlateHillEdibleForest.com. The new website is up. Go check it out. Let him know that you heard him here. Start firing off questions. Maybe hire him for some consultation and whatever else you want to do with Kevin. He is so, so great, and I hope that you liked that conversation. I was really happy to finally sit down with him and tape a conversation. I've learned so much from him over the years, and you can meet Kevin, at least virtually, because he usually hangs out with us on Thursday nights, and he's always a great pleasure to have there. Lots to say about everything, and I always love his perspective, and so do others. So Please join us at the Hangouts. Sign up for a subscription. Maybe you can be on the show. What is your expertise? What are you great at talking about? Let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. That's all I've got for you today. Again, sorry it's late. I've got a big week planned for you. I hope that you will subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Tell your friends if you haven't already told your friends. Review the show on Spotify and iTunes, Apple iTunes, if you haven't already done that. And have a great day. Be well. I love you guys. Thank you very much for your patience today and each and every day as I'm doing this by the seat of my pants, working with my intern Odessa, who's been great. And thank you to John Carroll and Pete Coe for the intro and the music. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Love you. Bye.
Off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.